The phone rang at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, jolting me awake from the deepest sleep I had experienced in weeks. At 40 years old, I had learned to value every precious hour of rest, especially after long days juggling work responsibility and the quiet weight of single motherhood. My heart hammered against my ribs as I fumbled for the device on my nightstand, squinting at the bright screen through bleary eyes. Madison's name glowed there, and instantly I knew something terrible had happened. My 22-year-old daughter never called this late unless there was an emergency. "Mom." Her voice came through as barely a whisper, shaking with terror and desperation. "Please, you have to come get me right now. I am at Tyler's parents' house, and I cannot leave. Something is really wrong here, Mom. They will not let me go home." The line crackled with static, and I could hear muffled shouting in the background, voices raised in anger that made my maternal instincts scream with alarm. "Madison, what is happening? Are you hurt?" I asked, already throwing off my covers and reaching for the clothes I had left draped over my bedroom chair. "I cannot talk long," she whispered even more quietly, and I could hear the fear bleeding through every syllable. "Just please come now. Please, Mom, I am scared and I do not know what they are going to do to me next." The call ended abruptly with the sound of heavy footsteps and a door slamming shut. I stared at my phone in horror, my hands trembling, as I tried to process what I had just heard. Madison had been married to Tyler Henderson for only 6 months, and while I had always harbored concerns about their relationship, tonight felt different. Tonight felt dangerous. I had raised Madison alone after her father abandoned us when she was just 5 years old, walking out on our family without explanation or warning. For 17 years, it had been just the two of us against the world. By the time I turned 40, I believed I had already survived the hardest chapters of my life. I was wrong. She was my pride and joy, a brilliant young woman who had graduated summa cum laude from college with a degree in marketing before landing her dream job at a boutique advertising agency downtown. Everything changed when she met Tyler Henderson at a charity gala 6 months after graduation. The moment I stepped across the threshold of the Henderson mansion, Patricia Henderson materialized in the foyer as if she had been waiting for my arrival. At 40 years old, I was no stranger to confrontation. Life had already taught me how cruelty often hid behind polished smiles and money. Still, the look on her face made my stomach tighten. Gone was the polite but distant demeanor she had maintained during our previous encounters. Instead, her face was set in hard lines of determination and barely controlled aggression that transformed her elegant features into something almost predatory. "B," she said, my name dripping from her lips like an accusation. "You should not have come here tonight. This is a private family matter that does not concern you." I stepped forward, trying to move deeper into the house, but Patricia shifted her position to block my path more completely. She was a tall woman, nearly matching my own 5'7" height, and she used every inch of her stature to create an intimidating presence in the marble-floored entryway. At 40, I did not intimidate easily, but I recognized calculated dominance when I saw it. The chandelier above us cast dramatic shadows across her face, making her expression even more menacing. My daughter called me and asked me to come get her. I said, keeping my voice steady the way years of experience had taught me to do under pressure. "Where is Madison? I want to see her right now." Patricia's laugh was sharp and humorless, echoing off the high ceilings of the foyer. "Madison is exactly where she needs to be, learning what it means to be a Henderson wife. She is fine, B, but she cannot leave tonight. She has responsibilities to fulfill and lessons to absorb." The casual way she spoke about my daughter, as if she were some kind of student rather than a grown woman, sent ice through my veins. "What are you talking about? Madison is not your property. If she wants to leave, she has every right to do so." "Actually," Patricia said, stepping closer, a thin smile curling her lips, "she does not have that right anymore. When she married Tyler, she became part of this family, and this family has traditions, certain ways of ensuring that new wives understand their place and their duties." My chest tightened as memories of my own past flickered through my mind. By 40, I knew exactly how dangerous that word traditions could be when used to excuse control and abuse. "Are you saying you are keeping her here against her will?" I demanded. "That is kidnapping Patricia. That is a serious crime." "It is education," she corrected coldly, her tone sharp and dismissive. "Every Henderson wife goes through this process. It is how we maintain harmony within our family structure. Madison is simply learning to submit to the authority that will guide and protect her for the rest of her life." The words struck me like physical blows. This was not misguided concern. This was organized, intentional psychological abuse. "You are talking about brainwashing. You are talking about destroying my daughter's free will." Patricia shrugged with infuriating calm. "We prefer to think of it as refinement. Madison came to us with certain independent tendencies, habits that could damage a marriage. We are helping her become happier." From deeper inside the house, I heard it, a faint, broken sob, my daughter's voice. "That is her," I said, my voice dropping dangerously low. "That is Madison crying. What have you done to her?" "Nothing that will not benefit her in the long run," Patricia replied, though her eyes hardened. "Now I must insist that you leave. This process cannot be interrupted. Madison will contact you when her education is complete." At 40, I had learned the difference between fear and resolve. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. "I am not leaving without my daughter. Move out of my way, or I will move you myself." Her expression shifted slightly as she reached into the pocket of her silk blouse and pulled out her phone. "If you do not leave voluntarily, I will call security and have you arrested for trespassing. Tyler has documented Madison's mental health issues extensively. One call to the right people, and you could find yourself committed for delusional behavior and stalking." The threat was precise, calculated, and terrifyingly confident. Standing there, listening to my daughter's muffled cries echo through that mansion, I realized Patricia had done this before, more than once. I thought of the years I had wasted trapped in my own controlling marriage, the nights I cried silently so my child would not hear. At 40 years old, I refused to let history repeat itself through my daughter. "Make your calls," I said, stepping forward, "but I am getting my daughter out of this house tonight." Patricia gasped as I shoved past her, knocking her slightly off balance. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble as she followed, her voice rising in fury. "You have no idea what you are interfering with," she shouted. "This family has connections you cannot imagine." But I was already moving deeper into the house, following the sound of my daughter's crying. The mansion twisted into a maze of hallways and locked doors, each step confirming what my instincts already knew. This was not a home. This was a prison disguised as luxury. And my daughter was trapped inside it. Jake's transformation from the loving boyfriend I thought I knew into this cold stranger spouting scripture chilled me more than Patricia's threats. He spoke about Chloe as if she were an object to be fixed, rather than the brilliant, independent woman I had raised. His eyes held no recognition of the girl he claimed to love, only the zealous determination of someone completely consumed by ideology. "I specifically chose Chloe at university," he continued with disturbing pride. "Our mission is to save educated women from their own corruption before they spread their poison to others. She was perfect for our purposes, exactly the kind of prideful feminist who needed our intervention." The words hit me like physical blows. Everything about their relationship had been calculated manipulation from the very beginning. Those sweet courtship months, the romantic proposals, even their beautiful wedding ceremony, had all been elaborate lies designed to trap my daughter. Patricia gestured for us to follow her downstairs, and the men formed a human wall that made refusal impossible. She led us through hallways lined with family portraits that seemed to watch our progress with disapproving eyes. The house felt bigger than I remembered, with corridors that stretched further into darkness and rooms that hadn't been part of the original tour 6 months ago. "Let me show you something that will help you understand our work," Patricia said, opening a heavy wooden door that led to basement stairs. The smell that rose from below was a mixture of disinfectant fear and something medicinal that made my stomach clench. The basement had been converted into something that belonged in a horror movie rather than a family home. Medical equipment lined the walls alongside restraints that were clearly designed for human use. Religious artifacts hung between modern torture devices, creating a blasphemous combination of faith and cruelty. In the center of the room stood a metal table with leather straps and stains that I couldn't let myself identify. "This room has housed many projects over the years," Patricia explained, with the pride of someone showing off a prized accomplishment. "We've helped dozens of young women find their proper place in God's order. College professors, lawyers, doctors, all kinds of prideful creatures who thought they knew better than divine law." Against the far wall stood filing cabinets filled with folders containing photographs and personal information about women I didn't recognize. Each folder was labeled with a date and a status: in progress, completed, or failed. The failed folders were noticeably thinner than the others, and I didn't want to consider what that meant. My phone screen remained black despite multiple attempts to power it on. Even though the battery had been fully charged when I left home, the device was completely dead. The basement had no cell phone signal, and I began to suspect that was intentional rather than coincidental. A soft voice behind us made me turn around. A woman in her early 30s stood in the shadows, wearing a simple gray dress that hung loosely on her thin frame. Her blonde hair was pulled back severely, and her blue eyes held the hollow look of someone whose spirit had been systematically broken. "You must be B," she said in barely more than a whisper. "I'm Sarah Jake's sister-in-law. I used to teach chemistry at the University of Connecticut before my own cleansing 3 years ago." Her story emerged in fragments as Patricia watched approvingly. Sarah had been a respected professor with her own research lab when she met Jake's brother David at a conference. Their whirlwind romance led to marriage, and she had moved into this house believing she was joining a loving family. Instead, she discovered the same twisted ideology that now threatened Chloe. "They broke me completely," Sarah continued, her voice devoid of emotion. "The physical pain was nothing compared to the psychological techniques they used. Now I serve the family as God intended, grateful for their correction of my prideful nature." But her eyes told a different story. While her words spoke of submission and gratitude, something deep within her gaze suggested that Sarah's spirit wasn't as thoroughly crushed as she pretended. There was intelligence there, carefully hidden, but still burning beneath the surface. Patricia outlined their detailed plan for Chloe's final purification ceremony. It involved a combination of physical torture, psychological manipulation, and chemical substances designed to create permanent psychological dependency. The process had been refined over years of practice, with input from various religious and medical authorities who shared their beliefs about women's proper place in society. Dawn was approaching, and I realized how carefully this trap had been set. Every detail had been planned, from monitoring Chloe's phone calls to ensuring that no one would think to look for us here. Jake had isolated my daughter from her friends and college contacts over months of marriage, gradually cutting her off from any potential support network. The revelation that Jake had actually drugged Chloe at a college party before proposing marriage made everything even more sinister. He had stolen her ability to make a clear decision about their relationship using chemical manipulation to make her more compliant and agreeable to his plans. Their entire marriage had been built on deception and coercion from the very first moment. As Patricia led us back upstairs and locked us in separate rooms, I heard the sounds of other people moving through the house. Voices murmured prayers and preparations for what they called the morning's sacred work. Through the boarded window, I could see the first hints of sunrise beginning to lighten the sky, bringing us closer to whatever horror they had planned for my daughter. The sound of chanting voices drifted through the house as dawn light filtered through cracks in the boarded windows. Multiple footsteps moved through corridors, accompanied by the clinking of metal implements and whispered prayers that made my skin crawl. Whatever they had planned for Chloe was beginning, and I was powerless to stop it from my locked room. Through the thin walls, I could hear Patricia giving instructions to family members about proper procedures and sacred protocols. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had orchestrated similar ceremonies many times before. The casual way she discussed torture techniques as religious sacraments revealed the depths of their delusion. A key turned in my lock, and Jake's eldest brother Marcus entered carrying a tray of food and water. He was a large man with the same cold eyes as the rest of his family, but his hands shook slightly as he set the tray down. When he thought I wasn't looking, he pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and dropped it behind the bed. After he left, I retrieved the paper and found a hastily written note from Sarah. The basement has another room behind the furnace. Look for evidence of their other victims. Judge Morrison covers everything up. He's Jake's uncle on their mother's side. The revelation that a sitting judge was actively protecting this operation explained how they had operated for years without detection. Judge Morrison had the power to expunge records, dismiss cases, and ensure that missing person reports disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. The corruption reached much higher than I had imagined. Through the heating vents, I could hear conversations from other parts of the house that revealed the true scope of their network. Phone calls discussed coordinating with similar groups across New England, sharing techniques, and trading what they called difficult cases. They spoke about upcoming deliveries from college campuses and the preparation of new facilities in other states. A man's voice that I didn't recognize discussed chemical formulations with scientific precision. Dr. Marcus Webb introduced himself to someone as a former psychiatrist who specialized in breaking resistant personalities. His credentials had been revoked by medical boards, but the family valued his expertise in psychological manipulation and pharmaceutical coercion. The sound of Chloe's screaming from somewhere below made me forget everything except getting to my daughter. I threw myself against the locked door repeatedly, ignoring the pain in my shoulder, as the wood refused to give way. Her cries for help echoed through the house, mixing with chanted prayers that turned her suffering into a religious experience for her tormentors. Patricia's voice rose above the others, reading from what sounded like a prepared script about purifying the rebellious spirit and bringing wayward daughters back to divine submission. The ceremony had clearly been performed many times before refined through practice until it achieved maximum psychological impact while maintaining plausible religious cover. Through overheard conversations, I learned that personal belongings from at least 20 different women were stored somewhere in the house. Driver's licenses, jewelry, and college diplomas served as trophies of their successful conversions. Each item represented a life destroyed, a brilliant mind reduced to mindless obedience through systematic torture. The most chilling revelation came when I heard Patricia talking to Dr. Webb about preparing for the next batch from local colleges. They had connections within university administrative offices who identified promising targets, particularly women studying in fields they considered inappropriate for females. Engineering students, pre-med majors, and law school candidates were specifically sought out for their successful careers and independent thinking. My own nursing career had apparently made me a secondary target in their long-term planning. They viewed my influence on Chloe as the root cause of her resistance to proper submission, and my own education needed correction before I could spread my poison to other young women. The trap had been set not just for Chloe, but for our entire family line. As the morning progressed, the sounds from below grew more intense. Chloe's voice became hoarse from screaming, then fell silent in ways that terrified me more than her cries. The chanting continued rhythmically, punctuated by metallic sounds and hushed consultations between Dr. Webb and other participants about proper procedures and dosage calculations. Heavy footsteps approached my door again, and this time multiple keys turned in different locks. When the door opened, I saw Patricia flanked by 4 men, including Jake himself. They had come to collect me for the next phase of their ceremony, and the satisfied expressions on their faces suggested that Chloe's portion of the ritual had achieved whatever sick goals they had set. "Welcome to your daughter's graduation ceremony," B. Patricia said with twisted pride. "She's almost ready for her new life as a properly submissive wife. Now it's time for you to witness the final transformation and prepare for your own correction." The basement had been transformed into something resembling a perverted church service with folding chairs arranged in rows facing the metal table where my daughter lay restrained. Family members sat in respectful silence, their faces reflecting the satisfaction of people witnessing a sacred ritual. Chloe's eyes were unfocused, suggesting they had drugged her into compliance, but she was conscious enough to recognize me when they forced me into the front row. Dr. Webb stood beside the table wearing surgical gloves and a white coat that gave his barbaric work a veneer of medical respectability. He explained to the gathered family how the combination of physical stress, chemical intervention, and psychological conditioning had successfully broken Chloe's resistance to proper female submission. Charts on the wall tracked her progress through various stages of their process, reducing my brilliant daughter to data points and behavioral measurements. The ceremony was interrupted by footsteps on the basement stairs, and my world collapsed completely when I saw who was descending into this nightmare. Michael, my ex-husband and Chloe's father, walked into the room wearing the same black robes as the other family members. His face showed no surprise at finding us here, no shock at witnessing his daughter's torture, only the satisfied expression of someone whose long-term plans were finally coming to fruition. "Hello, B," he said with a smile that made my blood freeze. "I've been looking forward to this moment for 10 years ever since you destroyed our marriage with your selfish career ambitions and feminist poison." The betrayal hit me harder than any physical blow could have. Michael had orchestrated everything from the beginning, using our daughter as the ultimate weapon in his revenge against me for divorcing him a decade ago. The loving father who had shared custody and family holidays had been plotting this elaborate torture while pretending to care about Chloe's happiness and success. Michael explained his involvement with twisted pride, revealing how he had discovered the Thompson family's work through fundamentalist religious networks after our divorce. Their beliefs about female submission resonated with his anger about losing control over our family, and he had spent years learning their techniques while positioning himself to deliver the perfect target for their next project. "You ruined our marriage by choosing your nursing career over your proper role as a submissive wife." He continued, circling the table where Chloe lay helpless. "Then you filled our daughter's head with the same rebellious ideas, encouraging her education instead of teaching her to find fulfillment through serving men. Tonight, I correct both mistakes at once." The revelation that Michael had specifically guided Chloe toward Jake at college made everything even more sinister. He had researched Jake's family background, knowing their beliefs and methods, then arranged opportunities for them to meet through mutual friends and shared activities. He had even paid for their early dates, ensuring that their relationship would progress according to his timeline. Patricia revealed that Michael had provided them with detailed information about 5 other women over the past decade, including my former colleague Jennifer, who had supposedly moved to California for a new job. The targeting of educated, independent women wasn't random at all, but a carefully coordinated effort to remove feminist influences from their community, one person at a time. Michael's current wife, Amanda, sat in the 3rd row wearing the same gray dress and hollow expression as Sarah. Her transformation from successful real estate attorney to mindless servant demonstrated the effectiveness of their methods on even the strongest personalities. She had been Michael's practice run before he felt confident enough to target his own family. The psychological torture they had planned for me involved forcing me to watch Chloe's complete mental destruction while knowing that I would undergo the same process afterward. Michael wanted me to experience absolute helplessness before my own personality was systematically dismantled and rebuilt according to their specifications. My nursing knowledge would be erased and replaced with domestic skills, appropriate for a properly submissive woman. Dr. Webb began preparing additional chemical compounds while explaining their effects to the assembled family. The drugs would create permanent changes in brain chemistry, making independent thought physically uncomfortable, while providing pleasure responses to acts of submission and obedience. Years of research with unwilling test subjects had perfected formulations that could turn any personality type into eager servants. As they moved to the next phase of their ceremony, Sarah appeared at my elbow carrying a tray of medical instruments. But when she leaned close to hand Dr. Webb a particular syringe, she whispered words that changed everything. I'm not broken. We've been planning resistance for 3 years. Hold on. The realization that Sarah had been playing a role while secretly maintaining her intelligence and planning rebellion gave me the first hope I had felt since entering this nightmare. Her chemistry expertise hadn't been erased by their torture, only hidden beneath a facade of compliance while she developed countermeasures to their methods. Michael began his own preparation ritual, changing into ceremonial robes while reciting prayers about correcting rebellious women and restoring divine order to corrupted families. His complete transformation from the man I had once loved into this religious fanatic showed how deeply the cult's ideology had poisoned his mind over the years of planning his revenge. The basement filled with more family members as the ceremony reached its climax. Children as young as 10 years old were brought down to witness what they were told was a sacred correction of female pride. The systematic indoctrination of entire families ensured that their beliefs would continue for generations, with each new member learning to view the torture of women as religious duty rather than criminal activity. Officer Chen's revelation sent shockwaves through the basement room that seemed to reverberate off the soundproofed walls. As she spoke, she pulled out her communication device and activated it with practiced efficiency, her voice taking on the crisp tone of someone who had been waiting months for this exact moment. "This is Agent Sarah Chen, Federal Bureau of Investigation," she announced, her eyes never leaving Frank Henderson's increasingly pale face. "I am requesting immediate backup at the Henderson estate for a federal operation involving interstate trafficking and organized domestic violence." The transformation in the room's dynamics was immediate and dramatic. Officer Martinez stepped away from the group, his face reflecting the confusion and growing horror of someone who had just realized the true nature of what he had been protecting. The other security guard began reaching for his weapon before apparently thinking better of it, his hands freezing in mid-motion as he calculated the legal implications of his situation. "Agent Chen has been working undercover for the past 8 months. She continued addressing me directly while keeping the rest of the group in her peripheral vision. We've been building a federal case against an interstate network of organized domestic abuse operations, and the Henderson family represents the central hub of this criminal enterprise." Frank Henderson's composure finally cracked completely, his carefully maintained facade of respectability dissolving into desperate calculation. "You have no idea what you are interfering with," he snarled at Agent Chen. "This operation has protection at levels you cannot even comprehend. Phone calls will be made and your career will be over before sunrise." Agent Chen smiled grimly. "Actually, Mr. Henderson, those phone calls have already been made. Your contacts in local law enforcement, the State Attorney General's office, and the federal judiciary have all been under investigation for the past year. The corruption network that has been protecting your family is being dismantled as we speak." She gestured toward her communication device, which was crackling with status updates from other federal agents conducting simultaneous raids across multiple locations. "We have teams executing warrants at 7 different facilities across 4 states. The Montana location you mentioned in your recorded conversations is being secured right now, along with the subjects you have been holding there." Tyler had pressed himself against the far wall, his clipboard fallen to the floor as he tried to process the magnitude of what was unfolding. "This is impossible." he whispered, his professional training apparently not having prepared him for the complete collapse of his world. We have legal cover for everything: medical authority, patient consent, legitimate treatment protocols. Fraudulent medical authority, Agent Chen corrected. Coerced patient consent obtained through chemical restraint, and treatment protocols that constitute systematic torture under federal law. She pulled out a tablet device and began scrolling through what appeared to be an extensive digital case file. We have documented evidence of your activities dating back 12 years, Dr. Henderson. Financial records, medical files, patient testimonies, and now audio recordings of your family planning sessions. I remained beside Madison's bed, one hand protectively on her shoulder, while I tried to absorb the surreal turn our situation had taken. How long have you known about what they were doing to my daughter? I asked Agent Chen, fighting to keep accusation out of my voice, while recognizing that law enforcement priorities might not always align with individual rescue operations. We identified Madison as a potential victim 3 weeks ago when her credit accounts were suddenly frozen and her employment status changed without explanation, Agent Chen replied. We have been working around the clock to gather enough evidence for federal charges while trying to minimize the risk to current victims. She gestured toward the recording device in my pocket. Madison's decision to gather audio evidence has been invaluable to our investigation. She managed to document conversations and planning sessions that we never could have accessed through traditional surveillance methods. Madison stirred on the bed, the adrenaline of hope apparently helping her fight through the pharmaceutical fog that had been clouding her thoughts. There are 12 other women, she whispered, her voice growing stronger with each word. Some in Montana, others in facilities in Oregon and Nevada. Frank keeps detailed records in his private office safe. Frank Henderson's expression grew even more threatening as he realized the scope of evidence that was being revealed. None of this matters, he declared, with the desperation of someone whose entire world was collapsing. Even if federal authorities become involved, the process will take years. Evidence can disappear. Witnesses can be relocated or discredited. Accidents can happen to people who interfere with family business. But Agent Chen was already anticipating his threats. Actually, Mr. Henderson, the evidence has been secured and backed up across multiple federal servers. The witnesses have been placed in protective custody, and your family's assets have been frozen pending the outcome of federal civil forfeiture proceedings. Officer Martinez, who had been standing in increasingly obvious discomfort throughout the confrontation, finally stepped forward. Agent Chen, I need to clarify my position here. I was told this was a private security consultation for a family dealing with mental health issues. I had no knowledge of kidnapping or systematic abuse. We understand that several local officers were misled about the nature of their involvement. Agent Chen replied diplomatically, Your cooperation with federal authorities will be taken into consideration during the review of this operation. The sound of vehicles approaching the house at high speed filtered down through the basement ceiling, along with the distinctive whine of helicopter rotors that suggested a major federal operation was beginning to unfold above us. Agent Chen's communication device crackled with updates from the teams surrounding the property and preparing to secure all evidence and potential witnesses. But Frank Henderson was not finished fighting. His face had taken on the desperate calculation of someone who still believed he could manipulate the situation through sheer force of will and financial resources. This is far from over, he announced, his voice carrying the cold promise of someone who had spent decades destroying people who opposed him. Federal investigations can be complicated by jurisdictional disputes, procedural errors, and tragic accidents that befall key witnesses. Patricia Henderson, who had been silent throughout most of the confrontation, finally spoke up with the bitter tone of someone whose carefully constructed life was crumbling around her. 30 years of family tradition, she said, her voice filled with venom directed at Agent Chen and myself. 30 years of maintaining proper order and discipline, and you people want to destroy it all for the sake of one ungrateful girl who cannot appreciate what we were trying to give her. Agent Chen's expression hardened at Patricia's words. 30 years of systematic torture, financial fraud, and human trafficking, she corrected. The women you have destroyed had families, careers, and futures before you decided to give them your particular brand of family discipline. As federal agents began descending the stairs to secure the basement facility, I realized that our nightmare was finally approaching its end. But I also understood that the battle for justice was just beginning, and the forces that had protected the Henderson family for decades would not surrender without a fight that might last years and require more courage than I had ever imagined possessing. The arrival of federal agents transformed the basement from a private torture chamber into a busy crime scene as investigators documented every aspect of the Henderson family's systematic operation. Agent Chen coordinated the evidence gathering while maintaining constant communication with teams at the other facilities being raided simultaneously across multiple states. My first priority was getting medical attention for Madison, whose condition required immediate evaluation by federal medical personnel, trained in treating victims of systematic pharmaceutical abuse. As paramedics worked to stabilize her and begin counteracting the effects of weeks of forced medication, I made a decision that would prove crucial to our ultimate victory. Agent Chen, I called out, holding up my phone. I am going to broadcast live footage of this facility and Madison's condition. The Henderson family has spent decades operating in secrecy, but I want the entire world to see what they have done to my daughter and other women. Agent Chen nodded her approval. Federal evidence collection procedures allow for victim advocacy documentation. Your footage could help other victims recognize similar patterns and come forward with additional testimony. I activated my phone's live streaming function and began broadcasting to my social media accounts, providing real-time documentation of the basement facility while paramedics worked to treat Madison's injuries. The injection marks on her arms, the medical restraints, and the clinical equipment used for psychological torture painted a picture that no amount of legal maneuvering could explain away. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes, my live stream was being shared across multiple platforms, generating thousands of comments from viewers expressing outrage and offering support. Several comments came from women who claimed to recognize similar patterns in their own experiences with controlling families or abusive relationships. But Frank Henderson was not prepared to surrender without one final desperate gambit. As federal agents secured the upper levels of the mansion, he activated what appeared to be an emergency lockdown system that sealed steel barriers across all windows and doors. The house's security system, originally designed to keep intruders out, was being used to trap everyone inside while he attempted to destroy evidence. Federal agents cannot process evidence that does not exist, Frank announced with the cold calculation of someone implementing a plan he had hoped never to use. This facility contains backup generators and fire suppression systems that can be selectively disabled. Accidents happen during federal raids, especially when suspects resist arrest. The sound of power tools cutting through steel barriers echoed from the upper levels as federal agents worked to maintain access to the house. But Frank's lockdown system was clearly designed by professionals who understood how to create obstacles for law enforcement. Agent Chen's communication device crackled with updates from the perimeter teams, confirming that the facility was effectively sealed from outside access. "You are willing to kill federal agents to protect your family's crimes," Agent Chen asked, her voice reflecting professional amazement at the depth of Frank's desperation. "I am willing to eliminate evidence that could destroy generations of carefully built family legacy," Frank replied. "If that requires unfortunate accidents during a chaotic raid situation, then such accidents will be regrettable but necessary." The smell of smoke began filtering down from the upper levels, confirming that Frank had moved beyond threats to actual implementation of his destruction plan. But Madison, whose mind was clearing as the paramedics counteracted the effects of her forced medication, managed to reveal the information that would make his desperate gambit completely pointless. "Mom," she said, her voice gaining strength and clarity with each word. "The cloud storage accounts. I uploaded everything to multiple backup servers before they caught me recording. The evidence is already secure off-site." I stared at my daughter with a mixture of pride and amazement. Despite weeks of psychological torture and pharmaceutical restraint, she had managed to implement a comprehensive evidence preservation plan that would survive any attempt at destruction. "How did you manage that while they were keeping you prisoner down here?" "I set up automated uploads before the wedding." Madison explained, sitting up on the medical gurney as the treatment restored her mental clarity. "I had concerns about Tyler's family even then, so I created backup systems that would preserve any recordings or documents I managed to gather. Everything has been uploading automatically to federal servers through encrypted channels." Agent Chen's expression shifted from professional concern to genuine admiration. "Madison, your evidence-gathering operation has been more sophisticated than most federal investigations. You documented criminal activities that would have taken us years to uncover through traditional surveillance methods." Tyler had collapsed into a chair, his face reflecting the complete psychological breakdown of someone whose entire identity had been built on a foundation of systematic evil. 12 years of medical school, he whispered to himself. A practice built on helping people overcome psychological trauma. How did I become this person? How did I let my family turn me into a monster? Patricia Henderson's response to her son's crisis was characteristically cold and manipulative. "You became exactly what this family needed you to become," she said with icy determination. "A professional who understood how to maintain proper discipline and control. If you had possessed stronger character, none of these current difficulties would have occurred." But her words only seemed to accelerate Tyler's psychological collapse. Proper discipline. "We have been torturing women for decades. We have destroyed lives, stolen money, and murdered people who tried to resist our control. There is nothing proper about what this family has become." The smoke from the upper levels was growing thicker, and federal agents were working frantically to restore building access before the fire suppression systems could be compromised. Agent Chen coordinated evacuation procedures for the basement while maintaining evidence security, but Frank Henderson's desperation was creating genuine physical danger for everyone trapped inside. "It does not matter what evidence exists off-site," Frank declared, his voice carrying the finality of someone who had moved beyond rational calculation. "Without witnesses to provide testimony, recorded conversations become inadmissible hearsay. If this facility is destroyed along with its current occupants, the investigation dies with them." But even as he spoke, I could hear the distinctive sound of cutting torches, working through steel barriers, accompanied by the voices of federal agents coordinating their entry procedures. Agent Chen's backup teams had clearly anticipated the possibility of emergency lockdown procedures and had come prepared with equipment capable of breaching the Henderson family's defenses. Madison looked directly at the camera I was still using to broadcast our situation. "If anyone watching this has experienced similar treatment from controlling families or abusive partners, please contact federal authorities immediately. There are other facilities like this, other families, like the Hendersons, who use professional credentials and legal connections to hurt women." Her words, broadcast live to thousands of viewers across social media, represented the exact opposite of what Frank Henderson had hoped to achieve through his destruction plan. Instead of silencing the evidence, his desperate actions were amplifying Madison's message and creating a permanent record that could never be destroyed or discredited. The sound of steel barriers being breached echoed through the mansion as federal agents finally overcame Frank Henderson's lockdown system, their cutting torches and hydraulic equipment proving more powerful than his security measures. Smoke evacuation fans cleared the air while emergency medical teams rushed into the basement to ensure Madison and other potential victims received immediate professional treatment. Frank Henderson's desperate attempt to destroy evidence had failed completely, serving only to add federal charges of obstruction of justice, endangering federal officers, and attempted destruction of evidence to his already overwhelming list of crimes. As he was placed under arrest, his expression reflected the hollow defeat of someone whose entire world had collapsed in a single night. Tyler's complete psychological breakdown continued as federal agents documented his role in the systematic abuse operation. His professional credentials, once used to legitimize torture, now became evidence of his betrayal of medical ethics and patient trust. "I want to testify," he told Agent Chen repeatedly. "I want to help you understand how this operation worked so you can find all the other victims." Patricia Henderson maintained her cold composure even as federal agents placed her in restraints, but her eyes held the bitter fury of someone who believed she had been betrayed rather than caught. "You have destroyed a family legacy that took generations to build," she told me as agents led her away. "I hope you understand the magnitude of what you have cost us." Agent Chen coordinated the massive federal operation that continued throughout the night and into the following days. Teams of investigators processed evidence from 7 facilities across 4 states, eventually documenting a criminal network that had operated for over 30 years. The evidence Madison had gathered proved crucial in identifying victims, locating assets, and understanding the full scope of the operation. Madison's recovery required months of specialized medical treatment to counteract the effects of prolonged pharmaceutical abuse and psychological conditioning. Federal medical specialists worked with trauma counselors to help her reclaim her sense of self and rebuild the confidence that had been systematically attacked during her imprisonment. The process was long and difficult, but her determination to heal and help other victims provided powerful motivation for her recovery. The legal proceedings stretched across 18 months, with federal prosecutors building cases against not only the Henderson family, but also the network of corrupt officials who had protected their operation. Tyler's testimony proved invaluable in understanding the psychological manipulation techniques used to break down victims, while financial investigators traced millions of dollars in stolen assets back to victims' families. Officer Martinez and several other local law enforcement officials faced their own legal consequences for their unwitting participation in the Henderson operation. Federal authorities distinguished between those who had been deceived and those who had actively participated in covering up evidence, with sentences ranging from departmental discipline to federal prison time. The media attention generated by my live stream of the rescue operation sparked a national conversation about organized domestic abuse and the vulnerability of women to systematic manipulation by wealthy families with professional credentials. Congressional hearings examined gaps in federal oversight that had allowed the Henderson operation to continue for decades, leading to new legislation strengthening protections for domestic abuse victims. 6 months after her rescue, Madison had recovered sufficiently to begin speaking publicly about her experience and the warning signs that other women should recognize. Her presentations at colleges and conferences drew large audiences of young women who were learning to identify manipulation tactics and trust their instincts about potentially dangerous relationships. I founded the Safe Harbor Network, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting families affected by organized domestic abuse and providing resources for escaping systematic control. The organization grew rapidly as more victims came forward, many inspired by Madison's courage in documenting and exposing her own abuse experience. The Henderson family assets frozen during the federal investigation were eventually liquidated through civil forfeiture proceedings. The resulting funds provided compensation for identified victims and supported expanded federal investigation capabilities for similar operations. Madison's trust fund, which the family had attempted to steal, was restored, along with additional compensation for her suffering. Tyler Henderson received a sentence of 25 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to multiple charges, including kidnapping, assault, medical fraud, and conspiracy. His cooperation with federal authorities helped identify other victims and led to additional prosecutions, but it could not undo the damage he had inflicted on dozens of women over more than a decade of abuse. Frank Henderson died in federal custody while awaiting trial, apparently from complications related to stress and his refusal to cooperate with medical treatment. Patricia Henderson received a life sentence without possibility of parole, maintaining her belief that the family had been persecuted for maintaining traditional values rather than prosecuted for systematic criminal behavior. 12 other victims were eventually identified and rescued from various facilities, their conditions ranging from complete psychological breakdown to early stages of conditioning. Each required specialized treatment, and several chose to work with Madison in advocacy efforts after their recovery. The bonds formed between survivors created a support network that continues to help new victims escape similar situations. Madison eventually developed a romantic relationship with David, a federal counselor who had specialized in trauma recovery and had worked with several survivors of the Henderson operation. Their relationship developed slowly and carefully, built on mutual respect and understanding of the importance of genuine consent and emotional safety in any partnership. On the second anniversary of her rescue, Madison and I attended a ceremony where Agent Sarah Chen received recognition for her undercover work in exposing the Henderson network. The operation had led to the identification of similar criminal enterprises across the country, with federal resources now dedicated to investigating organized domestic abuse networks. As I reflect on our experience, I understand that the most important lesson was the power of persistence and the willingness to trust maternal instincts even when facing seemingly impossible odds. The Henderson family had spent decades perfecting their system of abuse and legal protection, but ultimately they could not defeat a mother's determination to protect her daughter and a daughter's courage to fight back against systematic oppression. The scars from our experience will never completely heal, but they have taught us both the importance of recognizing manipulation, trusting our instincts, and supporting other women who find themselves trapped in similar situations. No amount of wealth, professional credentials, or legal connections can justify the systematic destruction of another human being's autonomy and dignity. Today, Madison works as a national advocate for domestic abuse survivors, while I continue expanding the Safe Harbor Network to reach more families in crisis. We speak regularly at conferences and training sessions for law enforcement, helping them recognize the signs of organized abuse operations and understand the sophisticated methods used to maintain control over victims. Have you ever ignored warning signs about someone's family or relationship because they seemed successful or respectable on the surface? Sometimes the most dangerous predators hide behind professional credentials and social status, using their apparent legitimacy to silence victims and evade accountability. Trust your instincts, support other women who seem isolated or controlled, and remember that no family tradition or professional authority justifies systematic abuse. Thank you for listening to our story and for caring about the experiences of domestic abuse survivors. Your support and awareness help create a world where women like Madison can find the courage to fight back and the resources to rebuild their lives. Please like this video if our story resonated with you, subscribe for more survivor stories, share it with anyone who might benefit from understanding these warning signs, and comment below if you have your own experiences or insights to add to this important conversation. May you always find the strength to protect the people you love and the courage to stand up against injustice wherever you encounter it.